Alrighty then. Good evening, everyone. Hello. As Rena mentioned, my name is Jack Motlanthe, and I am the program manager here at Podcast Party, and I am deeply honored to introduce this evening's proceedings and the discussion we are about to have. So, just a little background. I joined Cliff Central in 2014, and I left in 2017 to go find my own way. And last year, in December, I got a call from Rena, and I returned just to host one show with Gareth, but our North Star had different ideas. So we sat down and we had a chat, and she told me about the podcast party, and I jumped at the opportunity to be a part of it. So, as Rena mentioned, we are here to bring about critical thinking and personal responsibility. This year marks an incredible year, not only in our history, but from a global perspective. As we all know, a majority of the countries in the world are going to be electing their new leadership, and we felt that it would be important that we come up with a platform where critical thinking and engaging conversations could take place, and hence the podcast party was born. However, this evening we are going to have this panel discussion that we call Democracy Unplugged, and with that said, let's get straight to it. Our three panelists, honestly, don't need any introduction, but I'm trying to earn my money. So, first up, we've got a man whose views on life in general have led him to be one of the most interesting, thought-provoking people in the space in this country. And he's following, not only on social media, but as well as on YouTube, is absolutely incredible. And somehow this man had enough time to come up with his own religion. Ladies and gentlemen, Penuel, the Black Pen.
Do I eat or wait for? Hi, guys.
It's interesting that he just started talking and then asked for permission, but it's fine.
Sorry, Jeff.
It's all right. Sitting right next to him is a man who has a surname that has had a major reputation in this country. But I think what is amazing is the fact that he's building a reputation all on his own, and his followers on YouTube, in fact, his subscribers on YouTube, would echo my sentiments. What I think is most remarkable about this young man is the fact that he's had conversations with some of the leaders in multiple disciplines, and he has not shied away from asking the more difficult questions. Ladies and gentlemen, Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh. Sitting next to him, who is our final panelist for the evening, is a man with over a decade's experience in debating, and he has coached young debaters along the way from high school level. He also has invaded, I like that word, invaded the private sector as he lends his expertise in communications training, strategy, and digital marketing. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the debate dojo, Mighti Jamie. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have a rather unstructured conversation, and I will open up the floor to these young men. And gents, the first question is, what is democracy?
Jeez, I'm not sure who's going to take it. The smart guy with the lab coat, maybe.
Oh my word. Oh my word. Okay, let me take it and start the conversation. I think that democracy is a good system of governance if you have enough power sharing between the civilians and the politicians and the elites. So if there's a smaller gap between them, the system can work because there's an accountability mechanism which really exists. But what we're seeing in SADC is not particularly this dream of democracy or the best version of democracy. What I think we're seeing here is some version of a bastardization of democracy, and it then becomes an illusion more than anything else. And I'm going to break that down a little bit, why I'm saying that. In SADC, we have these entities that are known as dominant party states. In Namibia, you've got SWAPO. In Zimbabwe, you've got ZANU-PF. In Botswana, you've got the Botswana Democratic Party. You've got the MPLA in Angola. All of these parties have basically been running the show since independence, right? And in South Africa, we've got the ANC. I think South Africa is a bit of an anomaly. I'll talk about it to the end. But the challenge that exists when you have these dominant party states is that you begin to have this "we will rule until Jesus comes back" attitude. You begin to have this us versus them attitude. You begin to have almost a peasants versus elites attitude, which you see in a lot of these countries. You see in the way that politicians deal with civilians. They are big men. They must have convoys. They must have all of these amenities that attach to power, and the civilians be damned. That's what I think is a big challenge, and why I say democracy becomes an illusion. The other side of the equation is you then get, they're not necessarily called oligarchs, but you do end up with all of these oligarchs who benefit from crony capitalism in SADC states. And what then happens is that they fund the politicians give them deals, and then you end up with a situation where there's zero accountability because there's a power disparity between the civilians and the powerful people. So last year, before the Zimbabwean elections happened, Al Jazeera did this big documentary where they exposed the corruption of the Zimbabwean government, that there's a lot of gold that is being illegally sold, and all of the people who were implicated kept their jobs. If you check now, they are still posting lavish cars, lavish lifestyles, the very same people who were named by name in the documentary, showing that the ZANU-PF government is so comfortable in their power that they don't give a damn. And they know that there's such a big power asymmetry between them and the people that nothing is ever going to change. And as a result, they don't care, right? Same applies to a degree if you look at what happened in Namibia. The fish rot scandal came up. A few ministers were arrested. But the implications of the fish rot documentary by Al Jazeera as well was that the president was involved. But he died in power. And when he died, he was still being celebrated as a liberator, as a great man, when his government was corrupt and ineffective. And it's very likely right now that they're still going to be the ruling party when they have the election. So there's a bit of an illusion, I think, to the democratic process in the African space, which is why I think that you've seen people becoming attracted to this idea of coups. There have been a few coups in Africa, and people have been very welcoming of the idea of, hey, there's a coup. In Chad, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, several places where the military just said, enough is enough, we're taking over. The global community thought the public is going to be angry and they're going to stand up for democracy. But the public were like, screw democracy, we don't care about it. We actually comfortable with the fact that these people were removed. And part of that came from the fact that there was a resentment which had been harboring for so long because people had felt powerless for so long that they were happy to screw the powers that be, even if it may have meant screwing themselves over as well. I think Guinea is the example, not Chad per se. But why did I say South Africa is different? I think that there's still a unique opportunity in South Africa for South Africa to follow the path of Ghana and Zambia, not necessarily the path of Zimbabwe. And that's going to depend, I think, significantly on how the ruling party either handles defeat or handles this particular election. It's not so much in our hands, but I think that will really be a test of what is the quality of democracy in South Africa. Why do I say there's still a uniqueness to this media landscape? In Zimbabwe, this already would have been shut down. Like, it wouldn't have happened. There would be somebody taking names. We would all find ourselves in some kind of a prison cell within 3 to 4 weeks because we participated in some kind of a discussion about democracy, right? That's the extent of the autocracy, so to speak. But in South Africa, you have this sophisticated media landscape where Gareth Cliff can say whatever he says about Cyril Ramaphosa and be fine, where Rob Hersov can call whatever minister he wants, any manner of names, and he'll be fine. There's obviously, it's not a perfect system, but the fact that you have this media landscape and you have this power disparity sometimes, there are still enough elites and enough of the middle class for the ANC to still have respect for people to a degree, and I think that preserves the integrity of the vote. When they don't care, when they know that they can beat you with buttons, shoot you, and do whatever they want, that's when democracy is at risk. So I think there's a unique opportunity in South Africa at this particular point, and the separation of the army from the politicians, I think, is also something that helps. Because in other countries, there's a very close relationship between the military apparatus as well as the political apparatus. And in fact, in other elections, military generals will be commenting in the media at a time like this to say, no, this guy, we're never going to follow him. That guy, he can forget it. And this guy is never going to have a chance during an election season. And that's the kind of thing that is not yet, or I don't think will happen in South Africa. So I think that it is a strong system of government where it works, where you have a power balance. I think it's mostly illusory in the African space because of the power imbalances. I think the dominant party-state issue is a problem, but I do think that South Africa has a unique opportunity now. The polls indicate that the ANC may not be able to hold on to a majority. So the question then becomes, if they lose, if they get 39, are they going to walk away from power, from perks, from privileges? Because the ANC is not just the politicians in parliament, it's also a lot of the ANC cadres who are in the bureaucracy, who are vulnerable to a change in administration, who are vulnerable to investigations by a robust investigations department, which wants to actually say, in Gauteng, what was actually stolen in the last 30 years? There are many people in many departments who are worried at this particular point. So a transition in power is not just about, does Cyril Ramaphosa agree? It's also about what happens within the bureaucracy of South Africa. But I'm curious to see what happens this year.
Shall I go and then?
Please do so.
Yeah, Pen will come in. Firstly, thank you very much. Glad to be with you all this evening. And thanks for coming out. Thank you, Rena. Thanks to panelists and host. Glad to be with you all today. Just for context, we have not been told what we're even going to be asked until we got here. So we're freestyling and we're riffing. And it's so hard to say something new about a concept that is so old and a concept that feels and has become something that sounds like old music. You know, the word democracy sounds like that song that you've heard 50,000 times by now in South Africa. But I heard something interesting recently that made me re-look at democracy in a different way. So to build on what Jamie has said, there's this poet, Ocean Vuong, who's recently just brilliant, like winning all kinds of awards, got this MacArthur Genius Grant, wrote 3 brilliant books. And he was asked about his writing process, because he's probably one of the great poets of our age, and in hundreds of years, when people look back to the poetry of this time, they'll probably look back to Ocean Vuong. And he was asked how he got his writing so perfect. You know, how does every word feel like it's meant to be there? And he says that he treats his sentences like a republic, and every word is a citizen in that republic. And I thought that was a fascinating motif to think about democracy as, you know, in this context, how you bring a thing of beauty into the world, that may be poetry. But it's about paying attention to the details of each word and realizing that each word counts to generate and produce meaning and beauty. And I thought that was a fascinating way of thinking about the sentence, about art, but also using a democratic motif to reflect on art. And I think we can use the way he talks about his sentences to think back about democracy, because there's something radical about saying that every single voice or every single person matters. No matter how small, no matter how slight, it may just be a little tilt to one direction or a slight tilt over 100 years to another direction. But the idea of democracy to me is that every word matters in the sentence, and every citizen, in theory, matters in the overall governance, which is actually, if you think about it over the long duration of history, a very radical idea. Why should every little person with all their eccentricities, failures, and hopes and successes, why should they matter? Why should they have an effect on the way the sentence sounds or the way the political community ultimately evolves? So, in some ways, democracy is trying to create a perfect sentence where you focus on each word and not just the final word or the first word or the biggest word or the smallest word, but a combination of all the words and how they each come together to form the final product. So I thought that was a new way of looking at democracy. I think democracy is a feeling, therefore, because as a word in that sentence, you ultimately have this feeling which you take for granted very easily. And as South Africans, Lord knows, if we do anything well, it's take things for granted. You have this feeling that you can have some kind of effect on the way your political community is governed. It may not be the ultimate effect, it may not be the decisive effect, but it is an effect. And that feeling is a certain sensibility that becomes part of who you are as you live in the political community. You feel like you can try to do things that might matter, and that's kind of what we're all doing by trying to influence the public discourse. We wouldn't do it if we didn't think that ultimately it's going to have some kind of impact. So I think democracy is also a feeling that we all share, that we can do something. Now, and I'll end here, I think part of the paradox of that feeling in South Africa right now is that we haven't found a way, given that we have the power to do something, to make something meaningful happen and to actually realize some kind of positive change. So we have the capacity to do that, but we have not yet realized that in practice yet. Particularly in these last, I would say, 15 years of ANC governance, the feeling has been one of having the capacity to change, but not knowing exactly how to bring about that change. So I think democracy is ultimately best understood as how Ocean Vuong puts it, as words in a sentence and each one mattering, which create a feeling of being able to do something. And what you do with that is up to the citizens and up to the words.
These guys speak so well. I'm nervous. Jack, thank you so much for the question. How do we understand democracy? I need to start off by obviously observing protocol. Rena, thank you so much for the invite. Thank you, Gareth. Thanks to the production crew. Thank you to all of you for being here. We really appreciate it. I was here, I think, a couple of months ago, sitting on the real VIP balcony up top there. And Justice Malala was launching his book. And I asked a question around terrorism. And what would it take for us to define our leadership as terrorists? What would terrorism look like? If you look at our power outages, if you look at the destruction of our railway systems, if you look at our economy, the jobs, you look at the violent crime. Just recently we had Zamazamas literally mugging people in traffic, and how the police kind of look helpless, if not complicit. I asked, could it be that we are run by a terrorist organization? Which becomes ironic because the apartheid government called the ANC and others terrorist organizations. And if we were to agree that they are a terrorist organization and they are destroying this country, potholes, destruction of infrastructure, etc., what would be the right action for a terrorist organization? We're here today, fortunately, because there must always be a silver lining. We're here, fortunately, because of the failures of our government. If our government was doing their job, like our chats would be in some obscure little corner and no one would be listening. We deserve a better government. Like, shut up, everything works. But we're here because it's failed and almost everyone is complicit in the failure. The vibes outside when we got here were so nice. Like, I wish we were having like beautiful chats about, the future of this country and AI and technology. But the reality is this is a very serious conversation and we need to take it with the seriousness that it needs. Democracy, I think, according to definition, has something to do with either the majority or the whole of the population choosing a government. So a government by the people. In this country, it's almost debatable whether this government we have is by the people. That's what we're told. But we've almost got maybe 40 million eligible voters, people over 18, according to the criteria. Of those, about 26 million are registered. So we lose the difference, which is 14, maybe, million, who are not registered at all. Of the 26 million in the last elections, we had just over 17 million that actually did vote. So if we're speaking like quorums and resolutions to be passed, we don't even meet 50% of eligible voters to vote, but we say this is our government. And then the ANC, of course, in its arrogance, as Jamie spoke about SWAPO and Botswana and all these other countries where there's like a majority party. It's 10 million people that voted for the ANC out of a potential 40 million. And they out there as if everyone asked for them, number one. Number two, one of the more, maybe spicy, I think is a better word. One of the more spicy things I've said is, I think people should need to earn a license to vote. Because when people are undereducated and ignorant, allowing them to vote is not much different to giving a loaded gun to a child. You're giving people that are fundamentally dependent on the state for their livelihood the power to somewhat choose. You're literally telling your child, if you don't pick me as your parent, we'll see where you will sleep and what you're going to eat and what you're going to wear. It's not really a choice. And Cyril still has the goal, President Ramaphosa, still has the goal to go out and celebrate that we almost have 29 million, which is like half of the country, grant recipients. And we call that democracy. It is an illusion, realistically. We have educated folk, us that speak good English, that come and have these conversations, those of us who pay tax at least, and we're frustrated. Our voices don't carry the weight that they're meant to carry. A lot of us are scared of actually serving because politics in this country is violent. We see people getting killed in KZN all the time. And it's become a fat joke. Fikile Mbalula, as the Secretary General of the ANC, gaslights us on a regular basis. He doesn't care, and he knows we're going to get pissed. The person earning the grant is going to collect their grant. And I spoke to, I think, Ulebo. I apologize if I'm messing up his name, outside. And one of the things we spoke about was what's missing. Or he asked me what's missing from the media. And I said, I think the media listens to too many educated, well-off political analysts and not the real people on the ground. The people on the ground are frustrated with the ANC. They can see the potholes. They can see the destruction. They see corruption. They have to deal, especially in the townships. Their load shedding is worse than ours. If you've got 2 hours, theirs is probably 5. So you're like, then why do you keep voting for the ANC? It's because they understand that the ANC feeds them. It's where their kids go to school. It's where they get healthcare. Some of them, like my grandmother, for the first time they saw tarred roads because of the ANC. We used to use the bucket system when I visited my grandmother, Today they're flushing toilets. You literally have an abusive father, but you're like, but he feeds me. And until someone better feeds me and is honest and not gaslighting me about, but look at your dad, he's so bad. And you're like, but you and your people, you did worse to us. My dad still feeds me, gives me a house, etc., etc. The other thing we need to consider in the democracy conversation is the reality for the majority of South Africans, we never chose democracy. It was enforced onto us. It's part of the psychological thing we need to consider with black Africans in particular. We're still a people that lived under kings and chiefs. That's why Jacob Zuma still worshipped the way we call him Ubaba, our father. Because we see him as such. Mangosuthu Buthelezi almost ruled the IFP until he passed on. That's the culture we have. That's why we have so many old people in parliament, because we see them as our elders. They must guide us. We don't know this model, even though we think we do, and some of us are educated enough and have studied the world, but the reality is we still come from that mindset of, please do for us, mom, dad. We don't understand this dynamic of these political structures that we have. And the majority of the people are unfortunately undereducated. And I'd like to argue that it's intentionally done so. The ANC government gave us access to schooling that was reserved for white people. Some of us got to go to university for the first time. We got to mingle with white people in suburbia. What happened after we got that privilege? We thought we were better than the ANC. We don't want to vote for the ANC anymore. So they realized these people we are empowering think they're too good for us now. So maybe we need to stop this and revert back to keeping the people ignorant and dependent. So I think we need to have a conversation seriously about what it's going to take to fix this country. And maybe just in closing, one of the conversations I had on the Penuel show, it's going to be upcoming, is with one of the oldest serving members of parliament, Reverend Kenneth Mishwe. And we will speak about the Constitution, which, unless you're educated people still agree that one of the best constitutions in the world. People at the bottom feel that the Constitution has failed them. We spoke about the Bill of Rights, and we spoke about maybe we need to consider adding a Bill of Responsibilities in that. Got to visit the polarizing town of Orania, and one of the key takeouts there, which is one of the key things that is discussed even with the guys at AfriForum, is the pioneering spirit of Afrikaans people and doing for self. Well, outside of doing for self and oppressing black people, but doing for self and actually building the things they need. Whether it's a skills institution like Soltech, whether it's developing a country from scratch, whether it's setting up an AfriForum to challenge government, they do for self. And it's something that sadly black people, because we were promised manna from the heavens, in this whole thing of liberation, we kind of lost the ability to do for self. All of us want to be CEO and bosses and delegate to who? No one. And that's why even the elites enjoy illegal immigrants here, because they still want to work. We're all going to have to roll up our sleeves, unfortunately, if we want to save this country, or we'll need to have the hard conversation of saying, move out of the way and let this country collapse. Because then maybe the poor majority will finally listen to us about having better solutions for the country moving forward. That's my opinion on democracy.
All right. That was certainly insightful on many levels, because you guys tackled the definition from different angles entirely.
Can I just say we might now be going to jail after that?
Oh, no. I'm not sure if you heard my surname. We'll be fine.
Jeez. Have you heard mine?
Oh, take it easy.
Fine. We'll be fine. Your dad will be the lawyer. My uncle will bail us out. It's fine. So, you all mentioned very different pain points in your, I guess, description of what you think democracy is. Now that we have a date for when we are all going to elect our new, or perhaps reinstate the ANC, what, in your opinion, I realize I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball, but from your viewpoint, what do you think this country looks like after May 29th?
Jamie, please.
Okay, I'll jump in. So there's something that I want to touch on that you mentioned, Penuel, in your presentation about the ground. So there's a bit of a tension in the people on the ground experience the real government, the failures of the government, even more than the rich and the middle class. But at the same time, there's a bit of a distrust to, should we give them the responsibility to participate in the choosing of the next government because of the father-child paradigm you put there. So I think that people on the ground do have a keen appreciation of the politics of South Africa, even though they cannot always articulate it in the way that Sizwe does. What I think the challenge is in South Africa in particular is not so much the people, but the opposition. I think that the opposition has failed to go to the ground and communicate with the people in a meaningful way. There's a managerial attitude to the way opposition operates in South Africa. They sit somewhere, their offices, sometimes they're in Newtown, sometimes they're in Sandton, and they're like, okay, what must we do for the people? Wada. Try to see them on a weekend. Like, every neighborhood that I'm in on a weekend, I never see activists from a political party. Maybe we'll see them now, but this is the kind of work, the community organizing that they need to do, which I don't see a real commitment in. Whether it's the Democratic Alliance, Action SA, you name it. Sometimes I'll see one passionate councillor giving out flyers at an intersection. But by and large, I don't think that anybody I know or any neighborhood that I'm frequently in has got real political activity month to month, day to day. So what I think then happens, and this is what I often hear from people, they'll say, we know we don't want the ANC, but we don't know who we want. And that to me is not an indictment of them. It's an indictment of the service providers. the people who've come together, collected monies, and said, we want to be an alternative, right? So that's the first thing I think is worth considering, is to really say, you guys, the opposition parties, need to stop operating like soccer captains, not soccer captains, soccer coaches, you know, where your compeller on the sidelines speaking cryptically and pointing, you go there, you go there, you go there. We need more involved leaders. But I don't think there's a mindset right now to have that kind of street level involvement. But the second thing I want to say about the moment is that I think middle class South Africa also has the same issue. Because middle class South Africa is very averse to being involved. So for instance, we all know the crisis in public schools. We all know that we want to help with critical thinking, with artificial intelligence, etc. For instance, a chessboard at, what is it called? House of Chess. Chessboard is 200 rands. If you want to buy 10 of those, it's 2,000 rands. If you get your office to buy 10 of those, the individual contribution is not so much. You don't have to pay the whole 2,000. Let's say you think chess is a good way to teach these kids how to build their critical thinking. Maybe you say, let me teach them engineering, how to build bridges. Because sometimes, you know, I've always been perplexed to see kids jumping over a river when basic bridge building knowledge is accessible in every engineering and physics textbook from first year. You can build multiple bridge structures without government coming in. And I think this touches to your Orania point. But the people who have engineering knowledge, who could quickly disseminate this kind of knowledge on a weekend, to say, I'm just going to go to a village and help them with this bridge, they are also uninvolved. So it seems like middle class South Africa has said, we pay taxes. So you poor, learn better. Remove the ANC. Do you understand? And then we are paying taxes. We're paying taxes and that's it. And I think we have to ask ourselves, going into this particular 98-day period, does that attitude work? And it's not enough to say to your security guard and to your cleaner, don't vote ANC. That is not real activism or even community participation. So if there's a responsibility document or charter that we want to develop, I'm sure it's got to go beyond just what are the responsibilities of ordinary citizens, but also what are the responsibilities of anyone with any form of privilege. Because we understand the difference between having two parents who took you to a good school, Model C or whatever the case may be, Red Hill, whatever you name it, and those who don't have even one parent to make sure they go to school every day. If the dropout rate is 45%, which part of that percent have we ever tried to tackle outside of saying, we paid for taxes, what is NG doing? What is Fikile Mbalula doing? What is, you destroyed this thing, you destroyed that thing. What have we built outside of saying, I donated to civil society? Because sometimes in and of itself, that is a cop-out. You say, I gave 100 rand to equal education. I'm done for the year. I'm good. What are we doing? I think that's something that I think we should think about or explore in our conversation. Answer to your question more directly is, if the ANC loses and we have chaos coalitions, I think that we're going to be into 5 years of Johannesburg. I really don't think that there's enough emotional intelligence and political maturity to get it right the first time around. I'm still excited about the prospects of not having a dominant party state. I think the mess gets everyone involved in constructing the democracy, because now you know that if you don't get involved, nothing will happen. But I think we're learning from Johannesburg as an example that you can't sit on the sidelines. So if we get some mix of ANC 39, Action SA 7, EFF 19, and no one has an outright coalition building mandate, we're going to see some chaos. And we may even see Israel. I don't know if you guys follow that politics outside of the conflict, but at some point they had 5 elections in 4 years because the coalitions were not able to gel. And when I look at the room in terms of the egos of the leaders, whether it's Mashaba or Malema or Steenhuisen, Maimane, you name it, I'm not seeing enough people with the diplomatic acumen and the goodwill amongst themselves to pull together something that will remain intact long enough for the global community to say, you know what, South Africa's open for business, let's pump money in there, let's give them the same 1994 treatment. But I think after this 5-year period, the real coalition comes in 2029, because now we will have seen everyone outside of their promises, because now you've got new parties. They can make any manner of promises. What are you going to do about the water? We're going to drill a borehole in every backyard. What are you going to do about education? We're going to put a textbook in every child's mind. We're going to Neuralink that child. Anybody can promise anything, right? But after 5 years, we will then know what is the mettle of those leaders when they have a little bit of power and a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, sure. So much has been said, and it's going to be impossible to pick up on all the threads. What I would like to say, by the way, in light of recent events, is we are not launching a political party tonight. That's not the big reveal, even though this is called Podcast Party. Just to set you at ease, and anyone who is thinking that the 1000th political party in South Africa was being launched, that is not happening tonight. So two things. One, to carry on with the conversation about democracy and some of the provocations made, and then to get to your question about where are we right now? Because of course, this moment, I would argue, is actually a watershed. Democracy, in many ways, is another way of looking at it is it's the capacity to change your mind. There would be absolutely no point in democracy if you couldn't change your mind. Because once you'd made a decision, you would be locked into that decision forever. So embedded in the idea of democracy is that you might believe in one thing at one point, and then in the face of evidence or persuasion, you might change. And I think we're at a point, a real turning point. Every election, people have said it's a turning point, and then the ANC just comes back into power, and it's like, what happened to the turning point? I think we're really at a turning point. I think that before the MK party was announced, the ANC still had a hope of maybe clinging on to 51 or 48 and getting a small party to just carry on. I think that's gone. I really think that's gone, and I think the ANC is in absolute scramble mode and panic mode, because from 47 and 48, we're now talking about 40 and 38. And that is a completely different universe, right? Just take this, for example. Like, there's talk that, if the ANC goes, if they can't find a small party, they'll just go with the DA. What if the ANC and the DA can't get 50? Because the ANC could be at 30-something and the DA could come to, somewhere in the teens. I'm not saying that will happen, but that's now in the realm of, even those two are no longer potentially, where they were a 2/3 majority, they might just be a simple majority now. Now, it's always tantalizing to think that when you're on the brink of a democratic turning point, that the alternative must be preferable, especially when the status quo is so unappealing. Right? I think it's going to be messy. I think the ANC may well be out of power, but if they're not out of power, they're going to get massive concessions extracted from them, whichever way they go. And I think the ANC will never be the same again. This will be the election where all those times we've thought maybe it actually happens. However, and I hear Mighti's point about Joburg, and if you look at Nelson Mandela Bay, I'm still willing. I'm definitely going to get fired and go to jail after this. But I'm still willing to experiment. And I want to see, I think we know how bad things already are. And we know what the status quo delivers. We might have to take some pain to get to a new place that finally stabilizes. And it might be 5 tough years where we thought things were going to get better and they didn't. But I think there's only one choice. We have to go into the unknown and just muddle our way through. wonder, Joburg has been really unpredictable. But is it really worse than during ANC rule? I don't think so, actually. Actually, just objectively. It was a lot more unpredictable, and there was a lot more high drama, and we had different mayors of, intriguing origin. But I didn't see governance get 1,000 times worse. I didn't see it get 1,000 times better either, but I think we're going to have a muddle-through period where there's going to be a lot of political noise, and there's going to be a new president, and then a new president. And I hope we don't get lost in the political noise and think, let's go back to the status quo because that's where we're safe. What I think we have to do is see the noise and then find our way through to a new and a different future. And literally, that is staring us in the face right now, and we are going to have to figure out how to do that.
Sorry, before I give my crystal ball prediction. So at the last national elections, we had 17.4 million valid votes. Of the 17.4 million, the ANC got just over 10 million, which was 57.5%. The DA got 3.6 million, which is just over 20%. The EFF got 1.8 million, which is close to 11%. Then party number 4 and number 5 are the IFP and the Freedom Front Plus. The IFP got 588,000. The Freedom Front Plus got 414,000. If you tally just the top 5, it comes up to something like 15 million votes, which means the rest of the political parties is like 2 million. So I just wanted to make a comment on this thing of having a million parties. To be honest, a lot of people don't vote for them. I'm not really sure why they run, and the fear of them diluting votes, I think is not really something to be concerned about. From a crystal ball forecast, because I've been trying to think about this for the past maybe 2 years, and a lot of people are hoping that what happened at the last local elections is going to be a repeat, where I think about 11 million people voted. So Action SA doing really well. I'm not sure how the P8 did then, because I know they've been doing a lot of work since. Realistically, I don't see a huge difference from 2019. I think it would be really great if the ANC went under 50, but I think the ANC might go from 57 to maybe 52. Personally, it's not what I want. What I'd like is for the ANC to maybe hit maybe 40 or even less. It's what I'd like. But I think they'll do 52. I think the DA is going to probably remain largely the same. The DA, unfortunately, almost showed its face to a lot of people that were watching in losing Musi Maimane. And what came out is that many people who were funding the DA were not happy with the direction they were taking. A lot of the people that moved to the Freedom Front Plus, they were like, this is not what we're voting for, this is not what we want. And they were like, look, we're almost willing to lose. I mean, I listened to some of the utterings of John Steenhuisen, and I'm like, I don't think these guys are serious about being in opposition or maybe getting the majority vote. The EFF still makes a lot of noise on social media. They win almost every poll on social media. They are like 60%. The reality on the ground is a bit different, but they have been putting in work. They might bump up just a little bit. I'm hoping to see Action SA come into the top 5 mix. I like Gayton McKenzie, personally. Don't know the Patriotic Alliance much, but I like Gayton. I'm hoping they'll be somewhere there at the top. The IFP's got a serious stronghold. It might be challenged by Umkhonto weSizwe, because people love Jacob Zuma. But the MK, we still don't really know what it is, and we don't really know who's there. So I think the fear and the thoughts that are going out, it might be wishful thinking from some people that don't like the ANC. But I have been meeting a lot of people in the streets that claim they're going to be voting for the MK. Is it going to be enough? I don't know. Do they have enough foot soldiers and branches? I don't think so. Who are their leadership? Who are their volunteers? We don't really know. We know Jacob Zuma, we know his daughter, Ututuzile. The Freedom Front Plus is going to probably remain with its core. So I don't see much of a difference, to be fully honest. Some of the conversations I want us to have as what is meant to be the political elite, the people that pay the tax, the people that are hopefully going to be volunteering and doing more work, the people that contribute to civil society, gift of the givers and the like. We need to have an imagining of what is the future of governance for South Africa. With technology the way it is, artificial intelligence, blockchain, Do we really want to be stuck in these archaic ways of one cross manually on a ballot once every 4 or 5 years? Or do we want to reimagine something else that is more inclusive, uses technology? We had constituency-based voting just before 94, where you'd have these blocks, number one. I had the pleasure of meeting Dricus du Plessis, the UFC champion today, and one of the conversations he had with DJ Spoo, because he was being interviewed by DJ Spoo, was about the Springboks. And one of the things I've said, I said it when I came to visit Gareth as well, is the idea of seeing and almost championing our members of parliament like the Springboks. These 400 seats, of which we don't know who sits there. If you ever go to parliament.gov.za, you will be shocked at the faces and the political parties they belong to. Who are these people that are meant to be representing us globally? Fight if there was like a world champs or an Olympics of governments. Who do you think would actually take on these people? And how do we get South Africans to be like, you guys have an opportunity to almost pick your own Springboks, your own Bafana when you vote? And we can almost split into blocks and say, look, we are going to go with these guys. Because the NC's got about 263 seats, but we probably know like 10, 20. The rest are just dead horses sleeping, sleepers, as Unplugged says. The other thing we need to consider is who actually runs this country and who owns this country. Because in everything we speak about voters and taxpayers, but there are people that are almost comfortable with how this country is run. And that's big business. Locally owned and foreign owned. If they had a serious issue with how this country was run, we'd have sanctions, embargoes. But we don't. And there's probably a reason for that. It might be conspiracy theory, it's okay. There's an issue with the risen Africa. There's an issue in South Africa with risen townships. If the townships rise, it means the suburbia is going to lose cash. That's the reality. I argue with a lot of my capitalist friends. Capitalism is not a zero-sum game. I'm like, whatever. If the townships get uplifted, Capitec, ShopRite, whichever other of these companies, some of them linked to the Stellenbosch Mafia, they will not exist then. All their perks go away. And they've tried competing in other places and they suck. A similar thing happens with the African continent and South Africa in particular. If we rise up, if we have almost dollar parity and we have a strong currency and a strong economy, no one can bully us anymore. Does the West want that? Does Asia want that? Because it means now when they're importing our commodities, it means when they're doing anything they want, you're dumping all their stuff. All of a sudden it's expensive, and that's not really cool. So there could be a conspiracy of saying, big business is comfortable. Speak to Cyril, they speak to him now, Adrian Gore and the guys. It's like, look, as long as you can control these people, because this is what we kind of agreed on at CODESA. Just manage these peeps, let's carry on making money. If you're saying we're going the social welfare state route, it's chilled. As long as we're making cash. It's not just them, it's all the big mines and all the manufacturing companies and the big farms that operate in this country. Largely, we're just begging to be employees. They make a bulk of the money, they send their money elsewhere. They export our goods at cheap. Sometimes they beneficiate, sometimes they don't, and then they bring them back to us and the rest of the world at a premium, at a stronger currency. Those people are not invested in us getting better. That's why even some of your favorite rich friends they boast about their offshore portfolios, because they're also not invested here. A lot of the big businesses are sitting with capital reserves. They are not really invested here. They're just waiting to see if it's favorable. Will you remove minimum wage and those things? But those of us who actually have an emotional attachment to this country and want it to work, and we envision like a reimagined Dubai, we need to look into innovating around political engagement, not just voting. Is there a metric that we can use? How do we get people engaged on different green papers, white papers? Do we vote? How do we vote? How do we look at the seats? Should we be considering, if we're not meeting quorum in terms of registered voters, maybe some of the seats should be empty because clearly people don't want to vote. If you 14 million people don't want to vote, those are your empty seats there. And we're like, why are people sitting there if people didn't vote for them? Because we're all trying to force ourselves into this system that we seemingly don't really like, but we're too lazy and we don't want to be creative enough to change it. Outside of that, we maybe even need to look into parallel governments. Looking into how do we invest money, resources, skills, without making our government look good. Because the Springboks and Bafana and all the people that do great things here, they make our government look good. That's why Cyril's always applauding these people, even though it's not government that's making people look great. They are doing it on their own. How do we create a parallel government where we're like, thanks but no thanks? We're fine. Do we need to build mini Oranias? Do we need to create more gift of the givers and the like and say, we will sort this ourselves? We've rolled up. We're not going to go build a bridge and have the president go and applaud and make it seem like he's doing good work when it's not him. But as far as my predictions, I think not much is going to change, but I am seeing maybe the ANC losing about 5%, but I am hoping that it goes even below that. But the opposition parties are frankly embarrassing. And maybe they don't mind what's happening because these guys are mates with each other. They do love together. And at the end of the day, I normally tell people this. Political parties are like security guards at your estate. They're like your prefects. They're just representatives sent out there. They're meant to represent the people, but who they're actually speaking to is big business and global institutions and global business. But we're sending people who are going there to laugh. Hey, no, sir, at the UN and World Economic Forum to be liked. When we're like, we don't need to be liked. We need to be taken seriously. And for that, it's going to take a different type of mindset from, I think, all of us. From all of us.
I hear you. So, two things. I'm going to segue for a second. Please be patient with me. Ladies and gentlemen, one favor. If you are going to take pictures or videos, please switch your flash off. I got an earful from our producers. I keep getting these notes, so I don't want them anymore. Secondly, Sizwe and Jamie, you guys are fantastic talkers. I just need you to raise the volume a little bit.
Oh, it's just soft.
Just a little bit. Okay. So, gentlemen, you have now looked into your crystal ball, and what I can pick up from all of your answers is that we are moving into a new sphere or a new phase in life as far as South Africans are concerned. My question is, do we have the intestinal fortitude and the mental maturity to actually wade through those waters? Are we, as a collective in this country, really in a position to, as Penuel said, roll up our sleeves and actually get to work? Or do you imagine we are going to go back to 1992 where you had different factions in this country going at each other's necks?
Someone else should start.
Okay, Sizwe.
Yeah, let me touch on some of the things that have been said and then arrive at the question as well. I'm willing to bet the ANC will go below 52, for sure. And I base it on the data of the polls that have come out, which are not perfect, but they're also not always completely off. So I think we're talking right now in the range of 43 to 47, but that's before we know what the MK party will do. But we'll see. We'll see. One thing I wanted to pick up on what Pen and Mighti have said is they've touched on this element of big business, which I think is going to be a key part of that future. And is also a key part in the discussion about democracy, right? Because in theory, everyone has an equal voice, but some voices are louder than others. And in South Africa, because we're such an unequal society, that power differential is bigger than maybe anywhere else, right? So those with wealth and power, but especially wealth, are able to disproportionately reshape the discourse, which affects the democracy. So I fully concur with that. And I think what we have seen in this election is how hopelessly out of touch and inept the donor class is at understanding South African politics. They keep throwing around all this big money at silly, inconsequential projects that can't work, when what we need is all that money to actually do something meaningful. And I think part of the problem with why our democracy keeps spinning its wheels is because the people with money don't know where to put the money. And if you want to know how ridiculously useless they are at predicting political outcomes. Look how much money they gave President Ramaphosa and expected some kind of massive shift. Anyone could have told them that wasn't going to happen. But no. The so-called investors got the worst possible return you could ever imagine, right? And they keep throwing good money after bad, when it's very clear that what we need is an opposition party that just, number one, understands that there's racial injustice in the country, and we can't ignore it, and we need to address it, but also that we need a growing and thriving economy, and we can't do things that are going to completely plunge the country into a short-term economic crisis, right? We need to do both things, grow the economy and address historical injustice. And yet, no one can find that magic formula. So that's on the subjects that have been raised so far in the debate. Will we find a way through? Like I said, it's always tantalizing and appealing to imagine that something that's different will always be better. And I don't know. I don't know, but I think when you see rupture points in history, maybe we're entering one, maybe we're not, they open windows, and then it's whether you climb through the window or not. You know? So I think for 30 years, we have had a certain window and a certain model that has allowed a certain number of changes. And I think that window is going to radically open. What comes out of that window, I don't know. But I think it's also worth saying, and I'll end here, we've become so accustomed to the mediocrity that exists in South Africa that we actually think it's impossible, or at least some in government and some who hold power have told us that it's impossible for so long that we've begun to believe it, that actually, you know what, we just can't find a way out of this, and we never will, and so just give it over to whoever's running it now, because at least they know what they're doing, or at least they've had it before. It's possible. It's happened before. Other countries have done it. Other states have done it. So there's absolutely no reason why we can't find the wherewithal, and we can't find the collective wisdom to do it. But it's also possible that we might squander it, and that's the beauty of this moment of uncertainty into which I think we're going.
Pen?
Oh, Michael.
Yeah, your thoughts.
I thought you were going to speak about the Oppenheimers and Songezo. I wanted to be like, say it with your chest, boy. 15 million to a... the reality, Jack, is we don't have what it takes. It's very embarrassing and shameful to complain about old people in parliament who are still outmaneuvering and outsmarting us as young, somewhat articulate, educated people. It's like they're old and they're useless. So, I mean, run circles around them. You're smarter than them, use technology or whatever, but clearly we don't have what it takes. And we probably also don't have the grit, we don't have the balls, just physically. You know, one of the most powerful tools that the powerful use is violence. It's not by mistake that with the Pelindaba Treaty, South Africa, after the apartheid government started building nuclear bombs, before the ANC took over, we signed this, Africa's going to be a non-nuclear weapon zone. When America's got nuclear weapons, Russia's got nuclear weapons, North Korea, because violence is a language. Ibrahim Traore, I think he's 36, 37 now, the leader that overthrew the government in Burkina Faso, is a guy with balls. Some people believe Malema because of how he speaks. He sounds militant, he's got balls. Look, I'm not saying he doesn't. I'm trying to say that there's gonna have to be some uncomfortable...
Can I say it?
Oh, please.
No, he doesn't.
Not my words.
No, he doesn't.
At some point, we're going to have to speak about the reality of what it takes to actually lead a community, a country, whatever. People like myself, Dr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, Mighti, Jamie, Jack, we may have to look into things like military training. We may have to look into learning how to fight. Very uncool things. But it's one of the things I admire about a portion of the Afrikaner class, you know, especially the voortrekker, bittereinders, who believe in going to because, you know, black people are going to come and take over them. But there's something that gets built there. I mean, even something as silly as playing the sport of rugby. I've said this to one of my mentors, a black businessman, that without realizing it, Afrikaans boys are kind of trained to be able to handle conflict as sports. They play rugby where boys gym, get big, and they run into each other at huge speeds. I mean, look at the Springboks. Peter Steph, Tutoy, Dwayne Vermeulen. Just a war between the Springboks and Bafana Bafana. Physical conflict. Part of it is Afrikaans people love shooting. They love going to the shooting range. They take kids as young as 10 years old. They love camping, getting in touch with nature. So learning how to have, a feel. Black kids, once they move out the township, even going back into the township is, oh my gosh, do you guys even have, the idea of camping in the wild is scary for them. But well-off Afrikaans boys go camping and they love it. So we maybe have to develop some grit on top of our book smarts to be able to take on these people so that if an elder politician is looking at you with certain eyes and almost telling you, you don't know what I've been through, you can tell him, I don't care what you've been through, but I can take you on. Because clearly you guys suck with succession planning. It's one of the things that the black community, you look at it from traditional leadership. I mean, we have a Zulu king whose father failed to groom him and his brothers to take over the throne. Religious leadership, where constantly factions, Sonto Lama Nazareta, the Shembe Church has got split, the ZCC has got split into the Star and the Dove. And then politically, I'm going to apologize to him, but I'm going to reference a private conversation I had with Duduzane Zuma, who's got his own political party now, the AGC, all game changers. The conversation around why he's not with Umkhonto weSizwe, working with his twin sister, Duduzile. He told me this in confidence, but I think it's worth sharing. He said he loves his father very much. His father's been a role model to him, and he appreciates the work that his father's done. And his thing was, but why is an old man like my dad still running in politics? Instead of showing us the young people that they groomed to take over. He's like, that's why he's had to go a different way. It's like, I don't agree with what you guys are doing of holding on when you're meant to be pushing. It could be anyone. It could be the EFF and be like, these are the young boys that we groomed in the ANC Youth League. They must lead. So we've got a succession planning problem. And again, I'm going to reference Orania. They've got a young CEO of the Orania Beweging, US Stradom. And one of the questions I asked him, the podcast episodes are going to come out, is succession planning. The comfort of a 50, 60-year-old man to be like, I'm not in charge anymore. Speak to this 30-year-old boy. We've groomed him, we've trained him. If the ANC, Abu Nelson Mandela and them went for guerrilla warfare training, train us. Because it's one thing to be fighting you as my elder for political seats, which is already silly. It's another thing if a Russia, a China, and America comes into this country and wants to steamroll you. We will not be able to defend you. We will not be able to defend you because you did not adequately train us. So we do not have what it takes. We're very good with mouth. We're very good here on social media and on podcasts. You know, what I looked at with the data and the, hey, Baba, Penuel for president. But on the ground, we don't have the grit. There are ward councillors who didn't do well at school, who are running communities, and sadly, it's because they couldn't do anything else. But we need the young, educated engineers who are going to go back into that community and be like, Faith, I'm not scared of you. We're in school together, but I can steamroll you as well. This community deserves better. We also need to have a conversation realistically about selfishness. There is no incentive for me as an engineer living in Bryanston to go and build a bridge somewhere. There isn't. Maybe if it's my community, maybe if my brother has to cross that river, I'd consider it. But if I have money, I'll go fetch my brother and he'll come study in Bryanston. So we need to speak about some type of realistic incentive. Whatever that conversation framing is, could be tax benefits. It could be maybe it's just a nice thing to do. Everyone's doing it. It's so cool, bro. I mean, there's going to be hot babes there. Gareth Cliff is going to be there, so there's going to be media personality. Like, oh, dope. Everyone's going to be there. I want to be cool as well. Or maybe in the job market, it's like, look, have you done any community work? These are the kind of candidates we're looking for. Have you built anything in your community where you come from? Motlanthe Lux, the few times I've sat with him, one of the things he's raised is, look at our political leaders and what they've done in the communities where they were raised, just as a measure of how useless these people are. So there's meant to be a measure of, okay, I think China has this meritocracy program, and maybe Singapore. Show us your track record. Yes, we hear, hey, you come from Mtuzuma, hey, Upume Matati, and so Before you hire, what have you done for your community back home? No, I'm a shining example for the kids. No, but realistically, I mean, you're a programmer, what have you done there? You can say, look, I've actually taught 30 kids. I've helped kids get scholarships. I've helped, and you're like, okay, you're the type of person we want in our company or in our organization, whatever the case may be. So we need to have conversations around incentives. But again, when you go to the top of the big business chain, there are people up there who are potentially worse than our political leaders, who actually don't care about empowerment in this country. Fundamentally, it serves them best for townships to be drugged up, addicted to booze, pumping amapiano, and having no real direction. And then every now and then they send some of the employees to do CSI projects. Today we painted a school. Oh my gosh, it was so cool. We spoke to the kids. You're like, where's the real skills where you don't have to go back there again? But if we do that, maybe our company won't be able to make money there anymore. So what's the incentive? And I think we also need to stop maybe even competing in this country. I think that's part of the problem. We've got Indian Muslims who are trying to become wealthy because they're competing with the Jewish community. They are competing with white Afrikaners. And then there's the little black elite who haven't really built anything of substance, who are also trying to be friends with every one of them. We're not pulling together like the Springboks to be like, guys, how do we compete with the rest of the world and build a Facebook, a Twitter, and go back to trying to build the future of Sasol and Eskom and whatever as a collective, and not be like, but if we lose this market share in this township, let's go and exploit the rest of the world. Why can't we compete with China? Why can't we compete with America? We can do it, but it requires a mindset change. But we do not have what it takes because we lack the balls, all of us, and we're going to have a conversation about that.
I hear you, man. Jamie?
Okay, so I want to first check if my voice is louder. Okay, so that's number one. So I want to discuss this idea that Zuma doesn't have what it takes to really influence this election. Something that Penuel mentioned is that the MK doesn't have infrastructure and it doesn't have established leaders. And this reminds me of some of the rhetoric around Trump, the first campaign. If you recall, people say Trump is disorganized, he doesn't have an operation on the ground. He didn't need it because the apprentice was his operation. Everybody knew him, and he was able to bulldoze through established candidates like Jeb Bush, who had $100 million already raised, and Trump was able to just destroy those guys. So I think what Jacob Zuma benefits from is the fact that he's been on the T-shirt twice, and he's been the center of South African discourse since 2005, really, in a big way. And we can underestimate the impact of that, but I think that's something that allows him to bend the rules around what kind of campaigning you would typically expect from a new party. He doesn't have to put up posters everywhere. And the other thing is, Cyril is not a creature of the ANC in the way that Jacob Zuma is a creature of the ANC. So the branches love Zuma, and they have. He's viewed as a man of the branches. What that means is he has a lot that he can glean from the ANC in and of itself without having to do anything. Because whenever he speaks, even if he doesn't get carried by ENCA, even if he doesn't get carried by SABC, ANC structures will continue to discuss Zuma, either positively or negatively. If he splits the room 70-30, that's still 30 that he can pull away from the ANC. And that makes it very difficult for them to hit that 50, I think. So that's the Zuma thing. The second thing I wanted to talk about was this EFF thing and how they always win polls on social media. I think it's true that they do, but I think people also underestimate what that actually means and what the dynamics are of the EFF. If you think about the national rally, Marine Le Pen in France, it took her a while to become the largest opposition party, but the trajectory was very clear, right? And with each succeeding election, you could see that the national rally is getting much stronger. So what are the dynamics about the EFF we must consider vis-a-vis Twitter? Twitter has about 2 to 4 million users. The estimates are very difficult to get up. Try to actually get a hardcore number on how many people use Twitter, but it's about 4 million. And the age group or the demographic of the people who are using Twitter is between 25 and 40. Those are the daily active users, if you will. The median age in the country is 28, right? So if the EFF is winning polls in the demographic that will most likely open Twitter once a day, that shows you that they have now become the ruling party of the median population, right? Then the next thing you have to ask yourself is how are they doing with 20 to 25 as a demographic? They've won almost all of the SRSA elections, except a few. They won in UCT, they won in Pretoria, they got disqualified. University of Pretoria, I'm using these two as examples because these are the types of places where you wouldn't think that the EFF has convinced a plurality of students to vote for them. Now, SRSC elections are not fully representative because they don't have that much of a turnout, but they are more accurate than a poll because they have a larger sample space. At Wits, about 10,000 students can vote in an SRC election, which is much more than Ipsos would have. So what I'm trying to put across is that indeed, it is true that the EFF wins on social media, but not necessarily in the public right now. But look at their growth curve and consider the implications. 2014, 1.1 million. 2019, 1.9 million. If they continue to grow at that almost 80 to 90% growth rate, that means that they're going to cross the 3 million mark and may even hit the 4 million mark if they are focused on mobilization in the way that they've said they are. I think they are. They've tried to insist that all of their members be registered. They've said that they've crossed the 1 million registered members mark. And I think they're showing a resilience that we ought to be aware of in as much as we have the conversation. This is not to say agree with them or disagree with them. It's just to say have a sober perspective of the prospects. Because Julius Malema does have a path to presidency that is more clear than all of the other people right now who are in opposition. And what that means is that it's a variable that has to seriously be considered. That's just that on that. Now, going to your question is if we get into this turbulent period, what's going to happen? I think more South Africans will behave like white South Africans. If you looked at the Stats SA census data, the one population group that didn't grow in size, I don't know if you saw that, was the white population. Now, that's misleading because white people are having babies. They're going to private schools. They're getting an education. What's happening is that the graduate white person is choosing to emigrate as opposed to stay in South Africa, right? And what we are going to see more and more of if we get into a period of turbulence, I think people over 30 may have become financially involved in the South African ecosystem to the point where they don't want to live. They are 5 minutes to owning a house. They've got Vodacom contracts, this contract, that. Some are leaving anyway. But I think if you get into a period where either you have ANC 52% or the chaos of coalitions, right, I think a lot of people will then apply for passports and start responding to the headhunters who have already been reaching out to them on LinkedIn. So I think you'll begin to have a situation where you have a diasporification of the country. This is not unique to South Africa, but I think it will begin to happen. If you look at countries like Nigeria, large diaspora, countries like Kenya, because there's no incentive for a fresh graduate out of engineering at UCT or UP or WITS to stay and withstand 5 years of turbulence in the hope that 2029 is going to be better for them. Because what if it isn't? What if it's round 2 of turbulence? Then I've lost 10 of the most productive years of my life. So I think what's likely to happen if we start to see this turbulence is that we will start to see a diasporification of South Africa. It will mean that the economy for a period of time will be buoyed by the remittances because those people will still have an attachment to South Africa. But I think what we're going to start to see is that I just don't see the value proposition. If I have a computer science degree from UCT and it's just chaos in national government, I'm applying for a passport.
Well said, and I think well received, right?